On July 25, 2026, India's Union Education Minister Dharmendra Pradhan resigned. For a government that had spent 12 years cultivating an image of strength and stability, yielding to public pressure was a rare concession. But Pradhan's exit and the rapid overhaul of the national testing agency that followed were the direct results of a month-long youth uprising. The catalyst for this crisis began weeks earlier. Millions of medical school aspirants sat for the NEET entrance exam, only to discover that the question papers had been leaked and sold. The fallout was devastating. The leaks jeopardized the careers of countless young Indians, and in the immediate aftermath, more than a dozen students took their own lives. As families mourned, the government offered silence, refusing to hold anyone in the education ministry accountable for the security failure. When a state fails to address a systemic failure affecting millions of people, it creates a void. The anger of the student body had nowhere official to go, leaving a space that a new, highly unorthodox movement was about to occupy. The ideological spark for that movement came when the Chief Justice of India made a courtroom remark comparing unemployed youth and government critics to cockroaches and parasites. Student protesters immediately weaponized the insult. Led by a public relations student named Abhijit Deepke, they formed the Cockroach Janta Party, or CJP. They turned a dismissive judicial metaphor into a cohesive political platform, demanding a full cleanup of the exam system and the immediate resignation of the education minister. The state initially treated the CJP as a minor administrative nuisance. Officials assumed the students would eventually lose interest, and the sit-in at Jantar Mantar would simply fade away as exams approached. That calculation backfired. By ignoring the students' demands and dismissing their anger, the government ensured that a specific complaint about a compromised medical test would evolve into a much wider challenge to how the state answers to its citizens. The CJP established its physical headquarters at Jantar Mantar, a historic observatory in New Delhi that has served as a central site for democratic dissent for decades. The movement gained weight on June 28, when prominent climate activist Sonam Wangchuk arrived at the site and initiated an indefinite hunger strike to support the students' demands. As the weeks passed, opposition figures began to join the demonstrations. Leaders like Rahul Gandhi and Manish Sisodia visited the site, aligning their own political platforms with the student movement and calling for the education minister to be sacked. The BJP leadership responded by framing the protests as a cynical political tool. They accused the opposition of exploiting the students' anger to stay relevant after their recent election defeats, claiming the agitation was being steered from behind the scenes. This intersection of student grievances and opposition pressure forced the government to rethink its strategy. The state began to reclassify the protests, moving them from an administrative headache to a potential threat to national order. The tension peaked on July 20. An estimated 12,000 protesters left Jantar Mantar and began the Sansad Chalo March, heading toward the Indian Parliament. The police response was immediate. They enforced Section 163 of the BNSS, a law used to ban unauthorized gatherings, and deployed heavy iron barricades to seal off the New Delhi district. As the march reached the barricades, police unleashed tear gas and lathi charges to disperse the crowd. At the same time, telecommunication companies reportedly received government orders to shut down mobile internet services in central Delhi, leaving the protesters unable to coordinate or find their way. Witnesses described a scene of intense violence. Hundreds of students were injured, including many who were seen with folded hands, pleading with officers to stop the baton charges. The official police account presented a different reality. They reported that the crowds had been unruly and aggressive, attacking personnel with stones and vandalizing police vehicles, resulting in injuries to over 100 officers. But the specifics of the clash were quickly overshadowed by the images coming from the ground. When a state uses force and digital blackouts against thousands of its own students, it risks losing public trust. The government was backed into a corner, making political concessions inevitable. The sight of injured students outside Parliament forced the government to change course. To address the mounting outrage, they began initiating a series of rapid, high-level reforms. Prime Minister Narendra Modi personally announced the establishment of fast-track courts. These were designed to expedite hearings and ensure stringent penalties for anyone found guilty of leaking exam papers.
This was followed by an internal purge at the National Testing Agency. 47 officials were fired, and the agency announced it would scrap the pen and paper format of the NEET exam entirely by 2027, replacing it with a secure, computer-based digital testing network. The government framed these mass firings as an institutional rebuild. By focusing the blame on the testing agency, they sought to address the students' demands for accountability without directly implicating the central leadership. The final concession arrived on July 25th.
Dharmendra Pradhan submitted his resignation as Education Minister, citing his responsibility for the exam irregularities. In response, the CJP agreed to end the physical sit-in. CJP leaders were careful not to label this as a final victory. They described the resignation and the site clearance as a ceasefire, noting that their broader goals for job creation and education reform remained unfinished. The successful removal of a senior minister proved that a decentralized youth movement could extract a major concession from a government that had spent a decade emphasizing its immunity to public pressure. The Jantar Mantar site was cleared, but the protest had demonstrated a new, effective method for students to force a response from the central government.